Welcome to HID Academy's Edge Solo Quick Start video. The purpose of this video is to get you up and running with an Edge Solo device as quickly as possible, so let's move forward. Edge Solo hardware is designed to be as easy as possible to install and configure. The Solo devices are called Solo because they are intended as single-door access control solutions. All of these solutions require only a web browser to configure and be monitored from. No additional software is required. Very often, only a single Category 5 Ethernet cable is required to both power and communicate with the Edge Solo device. Communicating to the Edge Solo is normally quick and easy. The Solo device comes out of the box ready to communicate using either an IP address provided by the local area network or by using the Solo device's known IP address, which can afterwards be changed. Physical access control systems have traditionally been difficult to set up. Not so with Edge Solo devices. In the Part 2 video covering the Solo application, you will see that with only 4 mouse clicks and the entry of our first cardholder's name, an access control system can be placed into operation. Often, physical access control systems require more functionality than simply opening the door. Some individuals may require more unlock time than others. Doors may be required to be unlocked without need of a credential during business hours. Credentials may need to be configured with a date on which they will stop unlocking the door. The administrator often will want to know who unlocked the door on a specific date and at a specific time. These requirements and more will be addressed in the Part 2 video. The Edge Solo hardware family is composed of 3 products. The first is the ESR40. ESR stands for the Edge Solo Reader. The ESR40 plugs directly into Ethernet, contains all the electronics necessary to make access control decisions, and has a reader built in that is capable of reading I-class credentials. The ESRP40 does everything that the ESR40 can do while adding the capability of reading HID prox credentials. There are a lot of prox credentials in circulation. The ability to read these credentials in addition to the later generation I-class adds greatly to the flexibility of the ESRP40. Note that with the exception of the multi-class sticker on the bottom of the front of the ESRP40, its appearance and operation is identical to the ESR40. The ES400, also known as the Edge Plus Solo, provides the Ethernet interface and decision-making electronics, but no integrated reader. The ES400 is wired to a reader purchased separately, most often using Wiegand protocol. Wiegand protocol is an industry standard and is typically carried over a 5 or 6 conductor cable. Up to 500 feet of cable may be between the ES400 and its connected reader. Being connected to a separate reader allows for the ES400 to be mounted out of the weather as well as out of harm's way. Here the ES400 is wired to an R40 reader which can read I-class credentials. As well as being the solution of choice for outside doors, the ES400 is also the most flexible as it allows a great range of readers. If need be, it could be wired to a keypad reader, or, dependent upon what type of credentials will need to be read, can be connected to a proximity reader, or to other technology readers such as Indala or MyFair. In fact, the ES400 can be wired to virtually any credential reader using a Wiegand or clock and data interface. Shown here is the back of an ESR40 and a ES400. From this angle they appear identical. Turning the units around reveal the critical difference. The ESR40 has an integrated credential reader while the ES400 does not. The ES400 must be wired to a separate credential reader. Note that both units provide a power and communication LED on the underside. Because operationally the units are so similar, the remainder of this session will focus on the ESR40. There is no shortage of documentation that deals with the point-to-point wiring known as Wiegand protocol that is between an ES400 and its connected reader. Shown here is the back of the ESR40 along with its mounting plate. The mounting plate is designed to be screwed into a single-gang electrical box. Note that if you were to plug in the device at this time, you would have a tamper alarm. That is because the unit is not seated on its mounting plate. Even if the unit were seated properly, you would still have a tamper alarm if the tamper jumper on the circuit board were unplugged. The tamper jumper is only meant to be removed if an external tamper switch is being used. Also note the location of the door monitor and request to exit inputs. In a typical access control door, the door monitor input is wired to a door switch, which will provide an electrical closure when the door is securely closed. The ESR is capable of providing a forced open alarm if the door is opened without a credential unlocking the door. Note that because this particular ESR is not monitoring a door, a jumper has been installed on the door monitor input. The request to exit input, marked as REX, is there to provide people on the secured side of the door the ability to leave without generating this forced open alarm. The REX input is typically wired to a motion detector or push button on the secured side. A request to exit device is normally open, providing an electrical closure if an individual were to walk by the motion detector or press the push button. Another alarm that the ESR can generate is known as a held open alarm. This situation exists if the door is opened either with card or by request to exit, but is held open beyond a configurable time limit. There is another jumper on the ESR40 that will determine whether it derives its power from its Ethernet connection or from a separate DC source. There are also jumpers that determine whether the unlocking device and any auxiliary devices to be controlled by the ESR will be sent power or simply be provided with dry contacts. Consult the documentation that came with the device for details. The Edge device can easily be powered by a 12-volt DC power supply. There are power-in terminals dedicated for this use. It is often advantageous, however, to use Power over Ethernet or PoE to power the Edge device. This results in a single cable providing both power and communication link to the device. There are many PoE-enabled routers and switches available today. Be aware that on some routers and switches, the port will only power a device if the port is enabled to do so. A simplified method of providing PoE is to use a device commonly referred to as a midspan. By plugging a computer into the data in port of the midspan and then plugging the Edge device into the data and power out port, you have all of the network components required to get the Edge device up and running by Direct Connect. Note that availability of midspans UL listed for access control is limited. Upon plugging the Edge device into an operating PoE port, you will get an audible and visual indication letting you know that the device is powered and is in the process of starting up. After about a minute, the unit will be ready to be connected to and then configured. There are several ways of communicating to a Solo device. One method is to allow the Solo to acquire its IP address from the network. Once given an IP address, you will need to determine that address. On the bottom of the unit is the unit's physical or MAC address. Write the MAC address down and use this address when setting up the HID utility known as Jumpstart. The Jumpstart utility can be downloaded from HID by entering into your browser www.hidglobal.com/solojumpstart.exe. Once Jumpstart is installed, the MAC address may be modified at a later time by modifying the application's properties. Note also that within properties, the MAC address is entered without colons. Providing the MAC address is correct, and there is nothing on the network that obstructs the connection, the only action necessary to access the Solo application is to invoke the Jumpstart application. The Solo application will prompt you for a username and password. The initial username and password will be user as the username and leave the password blank. Note that in the address field of the browser, you can now view what IP address was assigned to the Edge Solo by the network. This is how to get Solo up and running using Jumpstart in a DHCP environment. Often, a more dependable method is to use the Direct Connect method. To access the Solo using Direct Connect, you will type the Solo's fixed default IP address into your web browser. This cannot work, however, unless the direct connected computer is on the same subnet as Solo. Solo's default IP is 169.254.242.121. To directly connect to Solo, temporarily change your computer's network settings to an adjacent IP address such as 169.254.242.120. Shown here is where this setting is within Microsoft XP. Different operating systems, even those created by the same company, often have different ways of making this change. If you still have issues, you can always verify that the change was properly made by going to the Windows command prompt and entering the ipconfig command. You will then be provided with the network configuration of your computer. You can determine that your computer is appropriately addressed and connected to a powered Solo device by running the ping command along with the Solo's default address. If this command brings a reply from the Solo device, but you are still unable to bring up the Solo application with your browser, cycle power to the device and delete the browsing history and cookies from your web browser. If your problem is that the unit was configured previously and you cannot get in because you do not know its password, there is a method for acquiring a password by contacting HID Global Technical Support. Make sure that you have the MAC address of the unit available prior to contacting technical support. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, feel free to contact HID Global Technical Support at support.hidglobal.com. From this site, you can submit a help ticket, access technical information, or determine the appropriate number to call in your area. This has been a production of HID Academy. This is Alan King, and thank you for watching.